Hello and welcome to the Fast Break pregame show. My name is Aman Kidwai, manager of the UConn blog and the Fast Break newsletter. This is the fifth episode of our preview show and definitely the most exciting one as we embark on this really exciting upcoming stretch of UConn's schedule. Last week, we previewed UConn's wins over St. John's and Butler and talked about the possibility of this being the best two-year stretch in program history. Since then, the Huskies throttled both Georgetown and DePaul this past week, setting up an incredible matchup on Saturday against number 4 Marquette. On this episode, we're going to preview that matchup and talk about this final stretch of the regular season. This show is a production of the Fast Break newsletter. We've got a bunch of writers and photo, video, podcast people going deep on UConn men's basketball, featuring in-depth reporting and analysis of the team, as well as some really interesting stuff on program history. This show is also a production of 22 Threads, purveyors of fine t-shirts, hoodies, hats, and other gear inspired by the Connecticut culture and lifestyle. They just launched a new line of Hassan Diarra gear that you should all go check out. That's on 22threads.com. All right, I'm joined by Patrick Martin, as always, writer for the UConn blog and the Fast Break newsletter. Looking ahead, the Huskies are first in the Big East standings, very much in the driver's seat for the regular season crown. The Huskies have a 13-1 record in Big East play, 2.5 games ahead of second place, 4 games ahead of third and fourth place, Creighton and Seton Hall. Patrick, did you expect UConn to be this far ahead of the pack with this much season left?
Aman, I'm going to do something very brave right now. I'm going to apologize. Hand up, mea culpa, and I hope a lot of other fans out there can do the same. I did not see this coming at all. In fact, if you go back and look at our predictions roundtable, I had UConn losing out on the regular season crown, winning the Big East tournament, and earning a 2 seed and falling short in the Final Four. Obviously, a lot of those are still to be played out, but I'm happy to be wrong about the fact that they are right now essentially one game away from possibly locking up the Big East regular season title with 6 games to play. And I also had said that there would be a lot of clunkers because there was so much transition from last year's title team to this year's that they would drop a couple of games the same way that last year's team had that head scratcher against St. John's. There would be clunkers. That's to be expected. I did not see this absolute wagon that this UConn team is, and that's what's been so impressive because they're this wagon that has no bad losses while overcoming injuries. Donovan Clingan out for 5 games. UConn wins 5 games. Alex Caravan going through a shooting slump. Tristan Newton going through a shooting slump. Both of them nursing small little knocks, and nothing has phased this team. You look at the St. John's game and see them down at the half on the road or on the road in the Garden, and Cam Spencer takes over. I did not see this depth coming, and I did not think they were going to be so far ahead of the pack. No disrespect to any other team in the Big East. I just nope. You cannot possibly say anyone saw this coming.
Absolutely. I would say to give my mea culpa, before the season, I had this take as a possibility because of not being so impressed with the rest of the Big East, but then I backed off of it. After kind of doing some homework on the rest of the Big East, I was like, man, Villanova with the transfers, Providence, Kim English is a good coach, Seton Hall, Shaheen Holloway, Butler's got Thad Matta, year two, Sean Miller at Xavier. The league is just so stacked with good coaches. And I think what it has been is that the league has a lot of solid teams, not a lot of great teams. And this UConn team is a great team. We talked about it a lot last week. They've exceeded expectations. Like you said, they don't have clunkers or they're winning their clunkers, which is just so impressive. What UConn is doing is a really high level right now. And to be in the driver's seat for the Big East like this with 6 games left in the regular season, we're in mid-February talking about it's going to basically take a miracle for somebody to unseat UConn from first place. That's it's nothing short of incredible.
If you look at the last 6, this is some Mad Max Fury Road style insanity gauntlet that UConn is going through. 5 quad 1 games left. UConn has faced just one top 30 KenPom team since December 15th, Gonzaga, and that was Creighton. We'll talk about the Marquette matchup coming up, but still not sure where Villanova is. Seton Hall and Kadari Richmond should give UConn fans nightmares. And then Marquette and Providence on the road, all spicy games. But it all starts with Marquette, because if you win tomorrow, you've got a 3.5 game cushion and a clear path to the number one seed in the Big East tournament. Why is that so important? Because then you don't likely draw Creighton or Marquette in the semifinals. And I know Hurley would say something like, "Oh, I don't care who we play and or when," but you really want to get those guys on Saturday with the type of atmosphere that UConn can draw on their first Big East final. So if they do win tomorrow, that puts them in complete pole position to take home the regular season crowd and start their title run. And that, I think, is what is going to be the most important thing. And the good news is, knock on wood, it's the healthiest the team has been all season. The big guy is moving great. Newton and Caravan are over their knocks. Stephon Castle is getting better by the minute, rocketing up draft boards. And all that depth that UConn built with Jalen Stewart giving us some good minutes, Solo Ball doing well, is going to come in handy now, because it gives UConn so many different looks in this brutal stretch.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you really do need to underscore this during this 13-game winning streak. That includes both DePaul games, both Georgetown games. Again, like we mentioned, there's been some injuries. There's still been some tough teams and tough wins for UConn for sure. But this final stretch of the season really is going to decide a lot. We thought it would probably decide a little bit more. Like we thought maybe UConn might be jockeying with multiple teams for something from first to fourth place around this time. Turns out it's basically, UConn, large gap, Marquette, another gap, and then you've got Creighton and Seton Hall. Those three teams might be fighting a little bit for kind of how the 2 through 4 ends up playing out. But yeah, UConn really in a position here, and then just with this matchup coming up uh, on Saturday, you got number 1 versus number 4 in Hartford. Ticket prices are out of control. The tip-off time is going to be 3 p.m., so it's not like it's too early. I think that's a good prime window. You've got the game on Fox. I mean, this is going to be the marquee event of this point of the season, of really the regular season schedule for the Big East.
It's the first top 5 matchup in Hartford since 2009 in Pitt, if I recall. And I mean, damn, we all remember how good those Pitt teams were and how they gave UConn fits. Fingers crossed that that isn't the script that Marquette follows and turns out to be UConn's big bugaboo. But this is just, I am so stoked. Just the stoke levels are through the roof right now. This is like, to use a little physics here, this is the irresistible force paradox, where an unstoppable force meets an immovable object. Let's not dwell on Marquette's little, I think they lost 3 of the 5 games between a stretch in December and January. This team is an absolute unit, and they are trending in the right direction after a weak stretch. Does that sound familiar? It should, because that's what UConn went through last year. Do not write them off. I mean, there's so much to talk about. Where do you want to go first?
I mean, yeah, I think we could just go overview of Marquette, and like you said, last season, the Huskies went 1-2 against them last year. They lost the first one on the road. They got a big win at home. I believe Jordan Hawkins got hot there for that win to get through. And then, a pretty marquee meeting in the Big East tournament that UConn ends up losing, and really starts to, again, at that moment, if you kind of put your head in where Husky fans were at that point, once again kind of reshapes, takes us back to negative town, to saying, okay, I'm just going to hope that they win one NCAA tournament game, and then just see what happens, even though I think they have the talent and potential to do everything. So Marquette was really a blocker last year. It was a blocker to making the Big East tournament final. It was the team that won the Big East regular season and tournament. The only team since the realignment to do that has been Villanova. UConn has a chance to do that this year, and I think that's a big deal for them. I also really think that yeah, like you said, they seem to be playing at their best right now. They've shaken off that early part of the season. They had a couple guys injured as well. They've won 8 in a row. Tyler Kolek seems to be playing really well, their best player. I think it's just to talk about kind of some of the larger picture stuff, it's a matchup that UConn cares about a lot. And I think it is something that Dan Hurley has thought about, like, how do I construct this team so that we are really, really capable of beating that other Big East contender, which is Marquette. And I think what UConn has done around that is just make sure it's got smart offensive players, it's loaded with shooters, and is a deep team. And I think all of those things bode well for UConn in this matchup against Marquette.
There will be three possible 50, 40, 90 guys on the court tomorrow when you look at Cam Spencer, Alex Kirabian, and Tyler Kolek. And Tyler Kolek loves to be the villain, and we love to dunk on him when he had his preseason shoot, throwing up the double birds. But in his last 7 games, he's averaging nearly 20 points per game, 10 assists, shooting 53% from the floor and 47% from three. He's just absolutely flipped the switch. I am that matchup between Tristan Newton is not just a Big East Player of the Year matchup. That's a potential Naismith battle between those two. They're top 20 in Evan Maya's efficiency. They both lead the team in scoring and assists. Newton happens to lead UConn in rebounds as well. And they have a distinct playing style. They're not elite athletes. They're two guys who are really adept at like using angles and change of pace and just kind of like a veteran presence that makes the team, tick. Um, but I mean, other things that jumped off the page with Marquette is you see every year when people are picking their brackets of like, oh, you have to find a team that's top 10 in offensive efficiency and top 35 in defensive efficiency by whatever date. Well, as of February 13th, UConn and Marquette are one of 6 teams that fit that bill. So the fact that these two teams are playing against each other on a Saturday at 3 o'clock is just so good for the game, especially considering Super Bowl's over. Cue the one shining moment. I mean, it is full on college basketball season from now till April. The casuals are turning in. It's all eyes are going to be on Hartford on Saturday, and I love the matchup for UConn.
Absolutely. It's a huge moment. And again, just to think about some of the implications here, Marquette was everyone's preseason pick to win the league. They were returning so much talent. And even though, like you said, they had this kind of rough early stretch of the season, none of those losses are too bad. You can excuse losing to Purdue and Wisconsin out of conference, right? That's not the biggest deal. Losing at Providence, also tough, tough event, tough thing to do is to go win there. Losing at Seton Hall, which happened to UConn this year. Good for Seton Hall, by the way, to have wins over Marquette and UConn on the resume. And then Butler is the only other loss they have, and they just avenged that loss on the road this past week. I think, we were talking about UConn's recent stretch of games not being so challenging. Again, some tougher games in there, of course. Really, it's very, very similar for Marquette. During their 8-game winning streak, they've got Georgetown in there, they've got DePaul in there, they've got St. John's in there twice. They got Seton Hall without Kadari Richmond, which was a game that they were able to win kind of comfortably. So, I give them credit for beating Villanova twice, including doing it on the road. You give them some credit for St. John's, even though I don't think that St. John's team is that good. But winning over Butler recently, that's probably their best win to date. And I think what's more important is they have Kolek going. It does seem like Marquette is going into this game feeling pretty good about itself.
Think about how, Kolek and Spencer are two sides of that kind of like trash talking coin. I personally think Spencer goes about it in a different way, but again, the same can be said for, fans of Tyler Kolek. Um, there's just so much narrative depth to mine from this game that it's going to be one of those, like, you just kind of sit back and enjoy, even if it may not be going well. I think with the XL crowd at 3 o'clock, there's always a chance of a big run, get a kill shot going, and they'll be back in the game in no time. But do you want to start going into some keys of the game here that I've highlighted?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the Huskies are going to be locked in here, like you said. We've seen that Hurley has proven to find all sorts of sources of motivation in the past, being number one, or like last this year, January was a big motivator as well, getting through January scot free. So I think that they're sure to be locked in here. In terms of the matchup, I mean, to start, who do you think is going to be solely responsible for trying to stop Kolek there?
Love that you asked me that, because that was going to be my first key of the game. I think Steph Castle is going to draw the assignment. I love his length and his ability to kind of envelop Kolek, and he can handle ball screens. He seems so far ahead of his age as far as reading pick and rolls on defense. And I would rather have the likes of Tristan Newton and Cam Spencer being help defenders as opposed to the point of attack defender on Kolek. And because they're smart players that can help, but Castle has the attributes to contain Kolek. But the other matchup that I'm really looking at will be the five. Oso Ighodaro is this. I'm saying this in college basketball terms, but he's a unicorn in the sense that he is this mobile five that everyone raved about, how Marquette can run these 5 out offenses because of him, because of his passing ability. You have Tyler Kolek, the one setting screens for him, and then you can flip that play in the next time. How UConn handles that with Clingan in drop coverage and then potentially Samson Johnson as a hedge, because we've seen UConn struggle uh, against Kansas with KJ Adams in that kind of short roll, that little kind of like floater. It's not really a jump shot. It's not really a layup. KJ Adams put up 18 points against UConn with that, on that short roll, in diving to the rim. How does UConn account for that? I'm worried about Clingan and foul trouble. He picked up 4 fouls against DePaul. That's a little problematic. Now, prior to that, he had only 2 fouls in 2 games, but he does have a tendency to put his hands down instead of up, and that worries me with Ighodaro, the way he can kind of attack the rim. So that does that mean we see a little bit of small ball? Possibly. We've seen Alex Karaban at the 5 work pretty well. Can he handle Oso in that sense? Does he have the foot speed to handle that? And the other big one, which again makes it such an aesthetically pleasing game, is pace. Marquette is all about running. I mean, they have their adjusted tempo. They shoot the ball faster than only, or they're 6 in average possession length of just 15 seconds. Their adjusted tempo of 69.5 possessions per game. They want to get it and go. UConn, on the other hand, they are meticulous at best and plotting at their worst. Their tempo is 326 in the country, with an average length of 18.5 seconds per possession. I know that doesn't seem like much, but in the fast pace of college basketball, that is a lot. I'm very interested to see how UConn handles that. They did very well against North Carolina, another team with a very high adjusted tempo, in containing their transition offense. Um, but that will be another test for them. Those are the 3 keys I see of, like, Kolek, Oso, pace.
I think your point about the pace is really interesting, including kind of having a similar type of opponent. But really, I have to say, we're talking about this matchup. I have a lot of confidence in UConn here. My big thing is going to be the point you mentioned about foul trouble. I think that's the number one thing that can derail the Huskies here, is basically if, like, let's say Clingan and Caravan get into foul trouble, that's where UConn then enters a stretch of trouble, maybe falls behind and can't climb out of that. Uh, Besides that, the only scenario I can kind of see Marquette getting ahead and staying ahead would be something like they start off really hot from three to start the game, and again build kind of a lead, and then it's too much for UConn to overcome down the stretch for whatever variety of reasons. I have a ton of respect for Marquette, uh, as well as for Shaka Smart as a head coach. Uh, but I do have to say, I really just like this matchup for UConn. The Huskies have been absolutely slinging it. They have proven that nothing has been able to stop them. They're deep, they're constructed well, they have plenty of scorers. All five starters are averaging 10 points and 4 rebounds. I really think, even though this is a number one versus number four matchup and a team that beat UConn twice last year, KenPom has this as a 7 point UConn win. I think, and I think it's going to really be something around there. I think it's going to take something pretty remarkable for Marquette to pull this off, especially at Hartford. What are your thoughts on just, kind of what potential final score here?
I'm going to borrow from good friend Mediocre Dan and say 70-55 UConn. I think I'm not going to get into any spread talk or anything like that. I'm no expert there. But I think it will be something that mirrors it, guys, college basketball is a game of runs. I can see UConn putting together a couple of kill shots and being up 10, 15, maybe even 20 points, but Marquette is also really good. There is going to be a run. And that is a lesser talked about narrative, I think, of if UConn is up 16 and Tyler Kolek starts going ballistic and strings together a 9-0 run, how does UConn handle that? We saw in against Villanova, UConn blew two leads of that similar nature. They have a tendency, because they're so good and they're so intense, that they play with their food a little bit. There's no finishing blow against teams except for Xavier. Um, so how do they handle a really good team constantly nipping at them? Because Shaka Smart, Marquette's not going to roll over like those Xavier teams did. They're going to be there at the end. Because of all that, I see kind of UConn keeping them at arm's length for most of the time, but plenty of runs. But at the same time, eventually kind of just stretching that lead up to about 15. 70-55 is what I'm saying. Book it.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, I would say the last time there was even a game where I was considering the possibility of UConn losing, that was the Creighton game after they got, named number one, and UConn just jumped out to a massive early lead in that one. Even in that, they have had some adversity, small to medium amounts of adversity, I would say. The Providence game, Caravan getting hurt, that game being kind of close to down the stretch. The Villanova game being close down the stretch. They gave some punches, but they also took some punches in that one. So I think UConn has handled a little bit of it. But yeah, you do have to give Marquette credit just in that this is going to be the toughest matchup that UConn faces in Big East play thus far this season. They did have a top five matchup earlier this year. That was at Kansas. We all know how that went. The difference is this UConn team is fully healthy, and my opinion, going to be hard to beat a fully healthy UConn team like this that's humming on all cylinders. We shall see. That game will be at 3 p.m. on Fox. Marquee matchup for the Huskies in Hartford at the XL Center. If you see me there, say hi. Otherwise, thank you all for watching.